Currency Pro Part 8, what makes a currency strong? In this video, I'll dive into what makes a currency strong. And in this case, by strong, I don't mean what makes it go up in value. That's supply and demand, and we already covered it. In this case, I mean what makes a currency strong and influential on a global stage. You see, it's not what a lot of people think. The anti-dollar crowd seems to think that things like large populations and natural resources make a currency strong. But India and China have a lot of people right now. So why aren't their currencies more relevant? I just discussed in an earlier video how the Chinese Yuan recently hit a 16-year low versus the dollar. And if commodities like oil was what made a currency strong, wouldn't the biggest oil producers have the strongest currencies? And the country with the most oil reserves, Venezuela, recently hit an inflation rate of over 160,000%. People started making art out of their money because it was worth more as colorful paper than it was as a currency. Even before the war, the Russian ruble had consistently fallen against the dollar for decades and lost over 90% of its value since the 90s. The pro-dollar crowd doesn't really have it right either. They often point to things like the US having the world's largest economy and most powerful military. Those things do matter, but they're actually not the main reasons that it will be so hard to bring down the dollar. I point to three others. First, the West controls the global financial system, and it's not that easy to build a new one. China and Russia have been trying for years with minimal progress. Money primarily moves around the world using two systems, SWIFT and chips. SWIFT is basically the language that almost all the banks around the world use to communicate with each other when processing transactions. It's based in Brussels and largely controlled by the US and the EU. Chips is a US-based system that clears about $1.8 trillion of transactions daily. In order to use it, you have to go through a US bank or bank branch. Russia came up with a SWIFT alternative in 2014, but it's barely used for international trade. And China came up with a CHIPS alternative in 2015, but 80% of its transactions still rely on SWIFT. The second reason it will be so hard to displace the dollar is that there is no viable alternative. A reserve currency needs to be held in large quantities by governments around the world. It's basically like their savings account. So to understand what qualities are important, think about the qualities you'd want in a currency that stores your savings. You'd want it to be stable, right? It's the same for a reserve currency. If countries are going to hold a bunch of your currency or your debt as a reserve, they don't want it swinging around a bunch or losing a lot of value. You'd also want to be able to access it at any time, right? And use it to buy whatever you wanted. Countries also want to be able to access their reserves whenever they need them and use them for whatever they need to buy. There's really no other country in the world that offers anything close to the level of accessibility, convertibility, and stability that the dollar does. The third reason that it would be so hard to displace the dollar is that it really doesn't make logistical sense for everyone to trade in their own currencies. Even if all the currencies were stable and easily accessible, paying for everything in local currencies would mean that you could only pay for Indian imports in rupees, Iraqi imports in dinar, Mexican imports in pesos, etc. Even if all the world currencies were stable and easily accessible, not only would every government and major bank have to hold all of the currencies in large quantities, which will be extremely inefficient, they'd only be able to use their reserves of a specific currency to buy things from a country that used it. If, say, Colombia bought more from China than China bought from Colombia, China would build up a massive quantity of Colombian pesos over time that they could never use. In order for that system to work, every major bank would have to set up currency swap lines to convert every currency into every other currency. It would be massively inefficient and a complete overhaul of the current financial system. In the current system, the dollar is the link that connects every other currency together. You can count on the dollar being stable, you can count on getting access to your dollars whenever you want it, and you can use dollars to buy just about anything from any country. That's why the dollar is involved in almost 90% of global currency transactions, and it is highly unlikely that the world will de-dollarize anytime soon in the next few decades. In my next video, which will be part 9 of 10, I'll briefly address the number one thing you need to know to avoid currency scams. And by the way, this is a 10-part course that's going to roll out over 5 weeks on YouTube. But if you want access to all 10 parts right now without clicking around YouTube or watching ads, check out the link below. Thanks for watching.